Welcome to another episode of Scales Sales. Really honored to be joined by Ben from Navattic. Ben, if you could just give us a brief introduction to yourself, but also the company you're working for.
Yeah, of course, Oliver. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here. Obviously, my name is Ben Pearson. I'm the head of sales and go-to-market at Navattic. Been with the company for about 2 years. It was the first non-founder hire, so it's been a lot of fun working in a smaller startup. What we do at Navattic is provide companies with a platform to build and deploy interactive demos with no code. So typically who we work with are marketers at SaaS companies who are interested in a PLG, a product-led growth sort of light, if you will, experience, allowing prospects to get hands-on with your software, typically at the top of the funnel. So that's what we've been up to. It's been a lot of fun to kind of grow and lead the market over the last 2 years.
Yeah, definitely. I remember when we first spoke, it seems like you guys are in a cool space and obviously doing some really great things. I think for the listeners to understand, and from your side, I mean, how do you normally go about communicating like the unique value proposition of your company?
Well, I think the beauty of Navattic is we really let our product kind of sell itself. So we do dog food our own software. If you log on to Navattic's website, you will immediately be greeted with a product tour embedded directly on our landing page. So in a lot of ways, we sort of use our own tool to show others what it is that we do. So I would say that's kind of like the beauty of selling at Navattic, and selling this tool specifically, maybe compared to other tools I've sold in my past, is that in a lot of ways, this product sells itself. And I think my job in that sense is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, definitely. Sounds ideal. I mean, it's a bit like recruitment in the sense of, well, we recruit. It's pretty obvious in the title. It's sort of no beating around the bush. So what I'd love to sort of delve into to start with is a little bit about recruitment. Obviously, this is my niche, obviously what I'm most passionate about. How do you personally go about your approach to recruitment and ensuring you've got the right team in place?
Yeah. So, a lot of the feedback that we get from new hires that we do get in seat, and we actually have a new one this week, is our recruitment process has been described as very diligent, which I've been on the other side of that, right? Which can be sometimes a little frustrating when you're like, holy cow, I'm in my sixth or seventh interview for this role. And that always used to kind of maybe rub me the wrong way a little bit. But now that I'm in the seat of hiring, I sort of understand why it is that companies do that. I think for the most part, we're just making sure that, number one, obviously they're a good fit for the role specifically. But what I always try to hyper focus on really is two things. Number one, are we going to be able to set this person up for success? So I think when I've experienced poor hiring at past companies or things like that, it oftentimes isn't necessarily the candidate. It's more the role that they're being hired to work on. Maybe that role isn't totally aligned. Maybe we didn't do a good job of sort of pitching what that role would actually entail. And so trying to make sure that what the job actually is lines up very well with not only some of the experiences they have had, but what they're potentially excited about exploring and diving into in the future. So that's going to be number one. And number two, by far the most important thing that I've learned since working at a startup specifically, is this person has to be someone that you're kind of willing to go to battle with, go through some rough times, some good times, and is very gritty, because the startup world is a grind. It's a roller coaster. It's an up and down. So we want to make sure we're inviting people into the team that are really up for that challenge.
Yeah, for sure. And to be honest, not a lot of external recruiters probably agree with what I'm about to say, but actually these longer processes, they are good. They make sure that you are getting the right person in place, especially a startup, because a lot of time and money can be wasted. If you get someone in and after, I don't know, 8 weeks, 3 months, they leave, that's a real impact to a startup. It can really set you back quite a few quite far. If you think about like in a lot of startups, the recruitment process can be hiring one person can take, well, potentially 8 weeks to hire that person. It has a real impact. So actually, when we're working with startups, we do like the fact of that they have these diligent processes. Don't get me wrong, it can be heartbreaking when someone's done 6 or 7 stages and then suddenly they go, yeah, well, we don't really think you're the right fit. I had it this week. I had a guy do 6 stages of interviews. The VP of sales has gone, yeah, we're going to offer him, we're going to hire him. And then out of nowhere, the CEO's just gone, from further reflection, I don't really think he's the right fit. And the CEO was the 4th stage interview. There was 2 more interviews after that. I was like, you've just wasted this guy's time. So as long as like the processes are aligned, I think that's the hardest part for a startup, especially when they basically getting into this hiring phase or maybe a hyper phase. It's actually having a process set out of, okay, for every candidate, it's exactly the same. This is how it works. This is the process. And it's clearly communicated, whether it's between yourself and the internal recruiter or whatever it be, or the external one. As long as everyone knows what's going on, then that's great. Because at the end of the day, if you're interviewing with a startup, you have to also appreciate that things change very quickly. Even the role can change. Like we had it as well where a company was hiring for a customer success person. And then 2 weeks later, after doing 3 or 4 interviews with us, they went, yeah, we decided actually we want a sales engineer now rather than a technical customer success. So it changes very quickly. But it's just about having, I think, that communication between the recruiter and the candidate and the recruiter and the client is super important.
Something that I've learned as well, which maybe is a good lesson, especially for startups, and I'm curious, Oliver, to get your take on this, is when we were planning out hiring, we always assumed, okay, we want to make a hire in Q4. So we'll talk about it then. We'll figure out the job description. We'll start the process then. It takes a long time to actually find the right candidates. So if you're considering hiring for roles, I would, especially for your startup, recommend you should probably start your search a good month and a half before you actually want to make that hire or even like begin the interview process, because it is going to take you a decent amount of time just to find enough people to go through the interview process with.
Definitely. So always say this, if a client's doing the recruitment themselves, let's say you don't have an internal team, you're a new startup and you're relying on your own network. Okay, cool. You might know 2 or 3 that you could just go, boom, come with me, let's hire you. But let's say you've got a more complex position. Generally, that role is going to take 3 months to fill. So if you're working with a recruiter or an external recruiter, if you give them the time to create a project, or I always say this to my clients, even if you're hiring in Q4, let's chat in Q3. Just have a brief understanding of what you might be looking for. Because what I can do is keep my ear to the ground. If anyone that's good comes up, I can go, okay, cool, send them over. Okay, yeah, this person's sort of right. And I always use a term with my clients. It's called just tuning in. Of like, okay, this person's sort of right. Okay, what else do they need? Okay, they need this. Because if you said, okay, let's hire in Q4, and then I get given a spec and I go, okay, you're going to spend the first 2 weeks at least trying to go, okay, I understand sort of more what you're looking for now. If we've never worked together, for example. But yeah, definitely it is always worth starting in a month and a half before. Completely agree with that. Obviously, getting the team in place is super important, but obviously having them. But the hardest bit about in any company is obviously retaining the staff. How do you personally go about ensuring that you've got the process in place to keep the staff?
I think this is one of the most important parts of my job, in my opinion, is not only hiring the right talent, but once we do nail that hire, making sure the retention is there. And so you can ask any of the members on my team, a pledge I make every single new hire is this pretty much on their first day. Number one, you do not work for me, I work for you. My job here is to set you up for success and make sure you are as happy as you possibly can be. And also, number 2 is my pledge to them ultimately is, hey, if you do the right things here, if you're crushing your numbers and doing all the things that we ask you to do, I promise you, I will always take care of you and I will make it really, really, really tough and challenging for you to ever consider leaving. So obviously that means, monetary bonuses, raises, things like that. But it also just means the culture that we're developing here around work-life balance, making sure I can do as much of like the dirty work, the things that maybe they don't enjoy about their job. If I can take that off of their plates, I certainly will. So I try to create a culture that ultimately is one that would be very difficult to leave. And it's something when I think back to my time as exclusively an IC, I don't know that I always felt that way. And I don't know that I've ever really necessarily had a manager, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, who really was dedicated to creating an environment that made me not ever want to leave. And I know that that's not a full reality. My dream and goal is for my reps to go someday and lead their own sales team and continue developing their career. That would be the biggest win for me. But I want to make sure it's super, super hard for them to do that because they love where they're at so much.
For sure. I think you touched on obviously the main point there of obviously you working for your team. If you can create that, and it's something that someone said on the podcast, actually, I filmed one this morning as well. And the individual said, what I've tried to create is this culture of that necessarily their team doesn't work for the company. They aren't part of that. Their team is like their manager and them, their own company, their own team within. So they actually have that energy to work for each other, support each other, and basically like create that sort of family environment. And I think in a startup, that is super important to be seen that no one's on a hierarchy. I can understand it in a bigger company. Like if you're like 1,000, 2,000 employees, like you're not going to have much touch point with the CEO, the CRO, whoever it be. But in a startup, if you see the CEOs getting involved or giving some advice or just there communicating, you're definitely going to be more bought into the company, the process, the culture. That's something that I love about our company is that recently our founder and CEO, he's become our SDR for the company. So he was just like, look, we don't have one. I need to get a bit more hands-on. I'll just funnel leads to you. You just go and chase the leads down. My expertise talking to people and doing that part. The admin, the other bits, not so great at. But so he looks at that and goes, okay, cool. My strength is doing this bit. He loves tooling up, loves doing all the writing campaigns or whatever it be. So that part of my job's taken away so you can focus on your strengths. And that again comes down to when hiring a team, it should be you hire for your staff's weaknesses. So you've got someone who's good at this and someone's to work together better. It's a general consensus.
Yeah, I think the example you just highlighted is a perfect exemplification of what a good leader does, right? Let me take care of Oliver, all of the things that maybe you don't enjoy or you don't do very well, and let me take that off of your plate so you're freed up to go crush the things that you do very, very well. That's absolutely what I love. And the last thing I would talk about is the word culture is very buzzwordy. People talk about that all the time, and it means work-life balance. It means all the things that we've also talked about. But to me, what culture also means is creating a winning culture. That's something we talk about in Navattic endlessly. It's what I talk about in all of our team meetings, is creating a winning culture, because in my experience, and I have a background in athletics, you're going to be a lot less excited about leading a team that is winning, that is crushing the goals, because winning takes care of everything. That's something we talk about a lot. And so obviously compensation, work-life balance, all of these things are very important for retention. But I've also found if you can create a culture, an environment in the company that is constantly winning and crushing their goals, people like to win. People like to be on top, and it's going to be harder for them to potentially want to jump ship from that.
Definitely. If you look at it from like a team sport environment, maybe like a baseball team, cricket team, whatever it be, you aren't leaving a team that's winning trophies every season. That is the be all and end all of it. And both of those sports are all individual contributors. There you've got the batters that are scoring their own points for them, but at the end, the result is for their team. Again, that's how a sales team, in my opinion, should be run, is that you're all contributing, you're all doing your own deals, you're all making your own money. But at the end of the day, the better you guys do, the better the company does, the better everyone does. And it's a really great point from yourself, to be honest.
And truthfully, I know nothing about cricket, but this is probably the first time cricket's ever come up as an example, and I love it.
Yeah, to be fair. So I barely know much about baseball, and I've had to learn a few terms just because I use this analogy. And normally I ask the question, do you know what cricket is? Or do you know anything about cricket? And it's normally the answer of no, the wonders of being British and working in the American market. But yeah, you're not missing much, to be honest. It's boring as hell, but it's my sport since I was like 12, but it's long, it's slow. But you do get to have a afternoon lunch in the middle of the game, so you get to have like scones, cake, cup of tea. So I mean,
That doesn't sound so bad.
no, it's not too bad. It's definitely an old man sport, but no, I'm probably gonna get a lot of hate for saying that, to be honest. All the British people will be going, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about." But obviously, so we've got the team in place, we've retained the staff, and obviously we've touched a bit on culture. But do you have any strategies or initiatives that you sort of brought in for more about sort of learning and career development?
Yeah, certainly. So when I think about career development with our team, and again, this all ties back to the retention and the culture piece, there's two parts of career development. There's a career development for my reps in our team of your role and your career at Navattic. Great. Cool. We need to talk about that. We need to focus on that. What does your trajectory here look like? What are some things that get you excited? How can we continue to help you grow in seat? But outside of that, I always try to save room for the other half of the conversation, which is what are we doing today to set you up for success at your next role, at your next job outside of Navattic? So we first talk about Navattic, and then we take the Navattic hat off. And I'm no longer talking to my team as their manager or their leader at Navattic. Now I'm talking to you as like a career advisor and a friend. And let's try to figure out, what are you passionate about? What is it that you want to do? And what can we do today in seat, in role, to best position you for that? So for example, I have a member on my team, and she's really excited about eventually doing what I'm doing right now, which is building and growing a sales team at a small startup. That's fantastic. I can help her understand what are things she should be learning, doing, plugging into now, so that she is best positioned when that time comes. Hopefully that time doesn't come for a while, because we love her and she's a killer and she's amazing. But when that time does come, it's going to make me so proud and excited and happy to know that she's ready for that challenge.
Yeah, definitely. And that is, I was talking about on a podcast at some point this week. And it's about actually understanding your team. If you're the sort of leader that isn't constantly communicating with people to find out what drives them, what motivates them daily, because I'm really honest, I love recognition and praise, like nearly more than I love the money. And just having someone just going like, "You're doing great, mate. Like I did a placement today," and our founder, he's not the most giving regarding sort of like praise or anything like that. But when he gives it, you know you've done a good job. And said, obviously, congratulations. And I'm like, cool, recognition, even though the deal was worth X, Y, and Z. But until you actually communicate with your team and start to work out actually what gets them going, you're going to struggle, because you can't just presume that everybody in the team is a carbon copy and they all react the same. Like, it's like if you go to somebody and you say, like, basically say, "Why are you last?" They will either crumble or they'll go, "Well, all right, I'm gonna make myself first." There's two sides to it.
I think great leaders are great people, however you may want to say that. But the idea is the fact that I can connect and communicate individually with everybody on my team versus sort of like one blanket way of communicating, and to your point, also motivating my team. So for example, I've got reps who they like the autonomy. They're like, Ben, screw off, I'm good, just let me crush my numbers, I'll let you know when I need help. Awesome. I wish that
Yeah.
maybe we had more communications, more one-on-one, more meeting, but as long as they're doing the things they want to do, I want to give them the freedom to crush their numbers in the way that they like to. Then I have other reps who are excited about meeting multiple times a week, who are really excited about me leaning in and like listening to their call recordings. And so I think as a leader, when you bring on a new team, something that we do is we ask all of our new hires to basically fill out an about me. We use Notion for this, but just like an about me doc. How do you like to receive feedback? How do you like to be praised? Do you like public shout outs? Do you like private shout outs? Do you like gift cards? Like trying to figure out who these people are at a person level and a people level first. That really helps us ultimately unlock the most potential of them, which is obviously the goal that, going back to the beginning of the conversation we talked about, is how can I put you in the best position to have success, and how can I communicate with you effectively?
Yeah, definitely. And it was actually a conversation I had this week with one of our reps, and it was basically about just reading people. The best salespeople are the individuals that can read a person or understand or show that empathy to a situation. Of that, one of our reps was closing someone, and the conversation was just so boring. I was like, I got off the call and I went, bro, I wouldn't have taken that job. That was the most bleak call. He was like, yeah, but I was sort of matching his like communication. And I was like, yeah, but you need to pick them up. You need to be the person to drive that conversation. If someone's a bit low, you pick them up. If someone's a bit too over the top, try and bring them down a bit. And it's about understanding and reading people, and they're generally the best salespeople that can understand that and do that naturally.
And also, if you're in sales, if you have that skill, that's going to help you close deals as well, right? Because the champions you're chatting with at these companies, if you can get on the same wavelength as them, ultimately people buy from people that they like. And if you can get on the same wavelength, they're going to prefer you.
Yeah, that last comment of people buy from who they like. I was having an argument on LinkedIn actually about a few weeks ago because I wrote a post about that. And I completely agree, because I can happily and sit here confidently say 90% of the clients I've won work with me because they like me, not because who Scale Genesis are. No one knows who we are. We're a small startup. I was even at a big company before. They didn't care who you're working for. They went, okay, Ollie, we like how hard you work for us, but I like you as a person. When we chat, you're not pushing me loads. It is the same across all sales. The rapport, likability is a huge thing. Like, I mean, I personally wouldn't buy from anyone who's an arsehole. Like, if I go into a store and like I'm buying some clothes and the staff are rude, I'll just leave. I'm not giving you my money. Why would I? The same applies to on bigger scales.
And as an IC prior to my time in Navattic, I had a few different encounters with recruiters that helped me join the companies I did in the past, and even recruiters at companies I was considering. And fair or not, my experience with a recruiter kind of painted my reflection of that company, even though that isn't totally fair. My first initial experience with that recruiter, I thought, was a reflection of that company. And sometimes I had really good experiences and I would take some calls and I would glean some interest. And other times I was like, wow, this recruiter's awful. I'm not interested at all. Like, if that company is hiring this recruiter, I'm not interested in that company.
Literally, we have this conversation. So we do work on retainer or we do on contingent. Our absolute pet peeve is when we're on contingent and they go, oh yeah, we've got another 5 recruiters working on it. And I'm like, okay, who are they? And I find out who they are and I go, okay, cool. I know at least 2 of those are going to create a bad name for you in the market. So even if they speak to a candidate, they're probably going to say no because of who they are, meaning that I'll potentially lose a deal because they would have been perfect for you. And like, this is sometimes communicating of, if you work with 1 or just 2 good recruiters, your name is not getting plastered everywhere. Your name is also not getting a bad image by having someone who doesn't have a clue about what they're doing. But yeah, very good point, to be honest. Obviously, we touched on it a little bit, but as a leader, I mean, what do you normally look for? How do you identify and nurture the emerging leaders within your team?
So I would say this question's maybe a little bit tricky on the startup side because we are a smaller company. We're a full-time company, I think 20 full-time now. So our team is a little bit smaller, which I think initially raises the red flag perhaps, or the question of like, well, what does upward mobility potentially look like at Navattic? The beauty of Navattic, and I think also working at a startup, is you have an opportunity to really have an impact across the entire company and the growth of a brand or a business, versus as an IC at a larger company, which I have done a few times. You're in charge of your book of business. You're in charge of your quota, your target, and that's pretty much it. Now, at larger companies, there's oftentimes more upward mobility in the traditional sense, right? SDR, AE, enterprise AE manager, something like that. At a startup, the unique experience you get is learning the ins and outs of how to grow a business, the failures, the learnings, the experience. So oftentimes when I'm pitching to candidates around why they should join Navattic, in my opinion, like the IC role, the sales executive role at larger companies are kind of a dime a dozen, right? Like those will always be there. You'll always have an opportunity to go work for those companies. But if you have a chance to join a startup, an extremely fast growing startup like Navattic, you have an opportunity to watch how businesses grow and run. And those are the lessons that you can't glean from working at a larger company. So it's a long winded way of saying if somebody's really interested in like the traditional path of upward mobility, the title changes, things like that, unfortunately, probably not a great fit for startups. But if somebody's like, hey, I have an opportunity to continue honing in my sales skills, but I can also go learn how to like build a marketing motion. I can learn how to work with product to develop new features and like work very closely with founders. These are lessons that, in my opinion, are way more valuable and also can be extremely impactful if you did go to a larger company down the road. So we really hyper focus on people who are interested in putting the business and the growth of the business kind of first and understanding the personal value they get from that by being able to have their fingerprints all over the business.
Yeah, definitely. And it's actually something that we recently sort of adopted to our priming technique with startups is that we had a guy, SDR, go into a startup environment coming from, I won't name the company, but from a larger company that have just gone through a massive growth phase. They've gone from something like 100 to like 600 in the last like 3 years or something, absolutely stupid numbers. And he goes into the interview and he goes, yeah, so I'm happy to be an SDR, but within 6 months, I want to be a SDR manager. And they're like, but we're only a company of 12 people. But it's just not going to happen. There isn't going to be enough SDRs for you to manage, and it just isn't possible. So at that point, straight away, that as the client obviously knowed him, was that the candidate needs to understand that they're coming into a company, needs to be bought into the vision of the company. And you sort of have to do what the company needs you to do at the time for a startup. It isn't, you're going to come in and call your own shots of, okay, I want to be an AE within 6 months. Like, okay, sometimes that's possible if there is an opportunity for it, if the sales are coming in, but it is about you understanding you're working for a company. It's about the vision, the growth of, okay, in a year's time, we could be from 12 and we could be at 100 employees. And at that point, it could be possible. But you need to do the sales first and you need to prove to us first before anything else can actually be promised or said.
I think this also gets back to the alignment of the candidate and the role. And also maybe as we're having this conversation, Oliver, learning for myself is maybe taking more time when chatting with candidates around what they would like to do potentially after the role you're hiring them for, right?
Yeah.
So if somebody says is interested in becoming an enterprise account executive and they're interviewing for like a BDR role, for example, not an awesome fit for startups, probably, right? Like, yes, you have an opportunity to close a lot of enterprise deals here, but what might make more sense is kind of climbing the more traditional ladder that we already talked about. Whereas, you know, a lot of the people that we've hired are, say, interested in potentially leading their own startup someday. It's like, okay, well, then Navattic can offer you invaluable experience. And all the reps on my team right now, like I guarantee you, are, if not already, going to be in a tremendous position to kind of take on any sort of role that they're interested in the future. So you kind of have to know the value of the company you work for and like what that can produce to somebody's personal growth and just kind of make sure that that is aligned.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's a super important part. What I'd love to delve into now is a little bit more about sort of your journey in leadership. Is there any key experiences that come to mind that sort of shaped your leadership style?
Yeah, so I'm going to do my best to answer this question. And if I just start going on a weird tangent, just tell me to shut up and we'll start over. But I would say I was in a very unique position where I always knew that this is what I wanted to do. When I broke into tech, I started working at Square as a BDR in St. Louis, Missouri. They were opening up a brand new office. They were growing the sales team there. I had an opportunity to get in pretty early. We had some tremendous leadership team at the time, and I got to watch how this culture in this team was built. And I think in that time, I realized building something with your own two hands is really cool. And this is something I knew I eventually wanted to do. I wanted to eventually lead my own sales team and build a go-to-market motion. I had to be very patient with myself. I had a lot of advisors telling me that when I was in my early 20s, being like, I want to lead a sales team. I want to do this and that. They're like, cool, but like you're 23, chill out, go through the motions, be patient with your development and learn the lessons that you need to learn so that when the opportunity does arise, you are positioned well for it. So that was really my path, is in the back of my mind as I was an IC kind of working my way through the ranks for like 5-6 years in the tech world between Square and Front. I knew that I was trying to just pick up little learnings from leadership that I had so that eventually I was prepared for this job and this role. And then the tactic that I take for leadership and what I would encourage everybody to do is this idea of extreme ownership. And this is how I run our team at Navattic and how I plan to basically be a leader for my entire career, is this idea of extreme ownership. And what that looks like in practice is if a rep misses a target, if a rep is struggling, if things aren't going well, the very first place you should look is right in the mirror. Why is my rep missing their target? Did I set a bad quota? Did we set the incorrect expectations? Were my numbers wrong? Were my metrics wrong? And I think when you have this extreme ownership attitude, it definitely rubs off on your team as well and creates a lot of success. When reps are struggling, they know that the first thing they should potentially look at is themselves. And so that's kind of the attitude that I've developed, that I've curated, and that I try to focus on, is that extreme ownership mentality of always making sure that you're looking in the mirror first before you're blaming your reps or anybody else. What did I do wrong? Where did I miss this? And kind of start there.
Yeah, do you know what? That is a really good point. Someone mentioned actually, if you ever have to fire a person, you should blame yourself because you've let that person down. And I sort of questioned them on it. I was like, okay, elaborating is obviously in the case of exactly what you said, that you have to look at yourself. If you're having to fire someone and you were the one who hired them in the first place, if you've hired them and you've seen the potential, which is why you've hired them, and it hasn't worked out, something's gone wrong. If it, okay, let's say some personal stuff's gone on in their life or whatever, but if they fail, then you got to take the ownership. And it's something that we've actually, so I had to fire my first person back in December. Worst thing ever. Would not recommend it to anyone. It is hard. It was worse that, so we're a group of 25-year-old lads, all good mates. It was one of our good mates as well that we had to fire, and it was my first ever, and it didn't go well. It wasn't ideal. I didn't get the response. They'd been on PIP and they didn't see it coming. And I was like, but you failed. But yeah, but I didn't know I'd lose my job if I didn't hit my, and I was like, well, what do you think would happen? But it was never ideal. But then we also had to look at ourselves. Okay, is there anything that we could have done here? What have we got wrong? Okay, maybe we weren't actually, and it was down to actually, we probably weren't giving him tasks that worked for him. He was quite a bit of ADHD. We were giving him a lot of Excel spreadsheets to be doing at the time, a lot of data stuff, which probably wasn't in his remit. Like, I think it just was completely blowing his head up, and I struggle with it as much, and I probably should have picked up on it a bit earlier. Okay, maybe I picked up the load on that a bit more, and he could have done something else he was good at. Again, he was a great communicator, which is why we hired him in the first place. But lessons learned from that one. But yeah, it's definitely the ownership side.
And with the extreme ownership too, what I always encourage people, and this is what I tell everybody that I sort of have one-on-one conversations with, is it doesn't exclusively mean from like a leadership perspective. Extreme ownership is obviously throughout your entire life, but also your career, right? Like when I got my start at Navattic, the reason I got this job is because I knew after many years of being an IC, I was ready to take that jump into leading my sales team. So I jumped on Y Combinator's website and I was kind of going through companies and seeing what startups were coming out of YC. And I found Navattic and I thought what their tool was super cool. I thought it'd be really impactful and helpful. And so I DM'd Neil, our co-founder, and I was like, hey, man, I'm Ben. This is what I do. I found your company. I think it's really cool. Let me know if you'd like to jam on how potential like sales reps could use this. And one thing led to another, became sort of like a mini advisor for them. And then they brought me on full time. But that idea, if you want something, like don't wait for somebody to offer it to you. Go get it. Take that extreme ownership of, I want this job. I'm going to go find it. I'm going to go get it. I'm going to go DM people. Like, take that extreme ownership throughout your career.
Honestly, we had an example of that last week. Some girl just randomly called, like literally a cold call to try and get a job with us. We're not hiring. We still entertained it because I was like, go on. Like, this is exactly the sort of person we would hire if we were hiring. One, they can cold call. Great. They're not afraid to do it. Like, that's the half of it. If you're getting someone who doesn't have much experience and they're scared to pick up the phone, especially, we don't do that much cold calling, but we obviously do it as one of our BD methods. But yeah, it's super impressive. It does actually catch the eye. Just moving on to sort of a little bit more about the leadership. I mean, along your journey so far, is there any sort of challenges you faced and how you sort of overcome them?
I think the biggest challenge I've faced is maybe a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? This is my first time as a leader at any company, and I wanted this job. I had confidence in myself that I could do this, but ultimately you don't know what you don't know. So I think that has been the biggest challenge, is every day is a constant learning. And I think the best way to have success, especially in something that you are brand new to, is be extremely humble about the fact that you don't know a ton of shit about the things that you're supposed to know about yet. And that's okay. It's okay if you don't really know quite what you're doing or how it's going to work out. Trust your gut. You have to be confident in yourself. That's why you think you can do this job. And that's ultimately why you have been hired. But I'd be lying if there were days where I'm very stressed out around, when I started, we were at X amount of revenue and now we're at millions in revenue. And I had never taken a company to that level. And now it's like, okay, how do we get to 15 and 20 million in revenue? It's like, well, I've never done that before. So it's a constant battle of these sort of demons in the back of your head being like, I don't know if you can do this. So taking it day by day, understanding that you have a ton to learn, be a sponge, be very open, be very iterative, and ultimately have some patience, but also confidence with yourself.
Yeah, definitely. I completely know your pain. Obviously, as I've told you, first year, obviously being a leader, to be honest, just making it up as I go along most of the time, or just going, okay, cool, how could I do this better? And it is constant a learning environment. And I think also when you're in your first year, that comes down to the company you work for being so important. If you've got leaders above you that understand and they support you and they're like, okay, cool, we know that Ben's going to be great. We're going to support him, whatever he needs. We've been through this journey. I think that's the super important bit. And if someone in your situation where you're looking for that first role, like as sort of senior leader, it is super important to actually look at the management above you. They're going to be the biggest impact on your career and actually setting you up for what sort of leader you're going to be in the future.
And you build that confidence through little wins. Like, all right, cool. We hit 1 million in rev. Like, now let's go hit 3 or 4 million in rev. And okay,
Yeah.
we made our first hire and she was super successful. Okay, I can hire successfully. Like, all right, I was really good at selling Navattic, but now I need to teach 3 other people who have never sold Navattic before to be successful. Okay, we've done that. So take some little wins along the way, and that's how you build up confidence to tackle the other problems that you don't have experience with, because you have little wins that have stacked up from your past.
Definitely. We've started implementing in the company that basically any sort of small wins, we've all got our own little basically list of wins that we can do. And every time we hit one, you get like a positive reinforcement, whether this is like you get a chocolate bar, or I know some of the boys, they'll get themselves a little vape or something if they've done a deal, or little rewards for basically. So actually when you're doing those tasks, maybe that you don't like, or that just reminding yourself, okay, it's so easy in sales to, you do a deal, you've done loads of deals in your career, and then you start to think, oh, you lose the excitement. But you've actually got to remember that every deal is super important to your career. And I know obviously having your quotas and hitting that and stuff. So it's just about definitely. And also, I think personally, one thing that I found that has really helped with sort of motivating is a lot of self-reflection. It's not something that I did, or appreciation for. I now spend, so in my new apartment, we've got a lovely balcony that looks over something. So every day I spend at least sort of 5-10 minutes looking out the window, do a bit of self-reflection, and also just have that bit of moment to myself to appreciate actually what I've achieved at the age of 25. And that helps me massively. Being just like, okay, cool, Ollie, you're on the path. I have stupendous goals of what I want to achieve and what I want to own and what I want to buy. Like I always talk about on LinkedIn that I want a Lamborghini. Whether I'll ever own one is like another thing. But
You will.
as long as as long as I'm taking every step every day, I'm reminding myself, okay, you're doing the right thing every day. You're being consistent with your behavior, your actions. You'll get there one day. And yeah, that's my method of madness, basically.
The dreams can be your best friend and your worst nightmare too. This is something I struggle with so much, is just sort of staying present. Like I think about it all the time with Navattic, like the insane success we've had for 2 years. I already am starting to think like, what is this going to look like in 2 or 3 years? Like what sort of exit are we talking? It's like, stop. Those are really exciting things. And as long as you do the things you're supposed to do and take care of the things you're supposed to take care of on a day-to-day basis, all of that stuff will take care of itself. So it's really exciting and good to have those goals. But also at the same time, you have to sort of ground yourself and understand in order to achieve those, you just got to keep stacking good days on top of each other.
Yeah, we're the worst for it, especially because we're so young with a company. We're like, oh, the big sell, like, what, maybe 5-6 years, or like, then we can go and do something else. We can have properties or whatever. But then we're like, okay, cool. We got a lot of deals to do before we can even get there. And 2023 is a fun year to be selling in. So yeah, it's part of the journey, and it's all really exciting. Sort of probably my last question for the podcast, and the sections are all about sort of work-life balance. Is there anything that you've sort of implemented, experienced to sort of have a bit more balance in your life?
Honestly, the first 5-6 years of my career, I was all in office. I was working in an office and it was so much fun. I wouldn't trade it for the world. It was awesome being in like your young 20s, working with a bunch of other young 20-year-olds and going to happy hours and going to lunches, and the whole thing was great. But now the number one thing I attribute to my work-life balance is the fully remote gig. It's great. It really promotes it. And honestly, I never really feel a whole lot of that burnout because I can go work out in the morning before work starts. I can take a 30-minute lunch break and go walk my dog or listen to a podcast over lunch, and all my calls end at 3:30 or 4 in the afternoon. I can cut out a little early and go do my thing. So I think having a remote first culture has really, really helped my work-life balance. And I think also ultimately working at a company, working for founders that I'm lucky enough to work for, is extremely motivating. And so I'm super, super locked in and dialed into the work that I am doing. It's honestly pretty hard to turn it off for me. When you do work at a startup, the startup kind of runs your life a little bit, but I love that. I love that shit. I love the grind. I freaking love what I do. I feel like I'm so lucky. I think I have the best job in the world. I never want to leave. And so because of that, it makes the work-life balance just really not an issue for me.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, coming to this company, I burnt myself out my previous one all the time. I was always ill or whatever it be in a startup environment, and I work way more hours than what I used to, but I'm never tired. I absolutely love it. Like,
I
it
love
is
it.
great fun, especially working with mates. We all got the same vision of we want to grow something and actually have our name on something to be the person that grew that. I think there's no better place to do it than a startup environment, for sure.
And the success also yields that motivation, right? Like the fact that, again, that winning culture we've built here, all of the success that we have had makes me want to stay up late at night working, has me thinking about Navattic always on road trips over the weekend, whatever I'm doing. It's kind of always top of mind because we're crushing it, we're winning, and I'm doing it with a bunch of people that I love. So it's a really good time.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that's everything from me, Ben. And I want to thank you so much for your time. There's really, really insightful stuff there. And I think the listeners are going to definitely pick up a lot, especially for the startup environment. But yeah, I can't thank you enough for giving your time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Oliver. Really enjoyed it and excited to stay connected.
Cheers. Thank you.